What we're essentially talking about here is a small trade dispute that's escalated, but we could easily be reporting a very different story. Deep sea fishing is one of the most dangerous industries in the world, and that's before you start throwing in boats colliding on the high seas. Fortunately, the only damage here has been to the boats themselves and not to the people on board.
People saying to you there, Paul, I mean, this is quite a shock seeing these sorts of pictures, even though these kinds of clashes have happened before over the years. Yeah, it's come as a surprise that it's suddenly erupted now.
Oh yeah, absolutely it's a surprise. It's a surprise to the fishermen here. We've been speaking to a couple of them today, and they're saying they didn't want this to escalate. When they went onto the seas, it was a peaceful protest. The problem that they've said is that while there are lots of French boats, the French boats here, as you can probably see behind me, they're actually quite small vessels. They're wooden vessels. They're not fishing on a large scale. The British boats, they say, are vast. They're big steel boats, and when they start manoeuvring in the water, it all got a bit confused in the high seas, and that's when the collision started. That's what the French fishermen say.
Thanks, Paul. Well, let's go to our Scotland correspondent, Kieran Jenkins, who's in Peterhead Harbour in Aberdeenshire, where two of the British boats who were caught up in this sailed from. Kieran, what are people saying there?
Yeah, well, it might be as many as three of the vessels involved in this row hailing from here in the northeast of Scotland, and people around here are familiar with these sorts of disputes, if not the aggression involved in this particular case. They've long argued around here against EU vessels coming in and fishing in these waters. This story is almost the reverse of that. I'm told it takes about 2.5 days at sea to get to the area off the French coast where these skirmishes took place. Now, I put it to some fishermen here earlier that the French are saying that Scottish boats shouldn't be fishing in those waters.
Well, they shouldn't have, but if that's the case, they're getting the Frenchians out ours.
Yeah.
Tit for tat, works both ways.
Those actions that the French vessels took, how do you feel?
Childish.
Yeah.
And there's no need for that. They could have just spoke to him on the radio, said to him, but every year our guys go down there. They know that every time. They're down there same time every year, and that's it, because they're in the open. Because they've killed everywhere else up here, so they've got to go somewhere else.
Now, part of the problem, of course, is that there hasn't been an agreement this year between the French fishermen and the Scottish and UK fishermen about who can fish what, who can fish it where and when. Now, industry representatives from this area are in touch with their French counterparts. They're hoping for talks as soon as tomorrow. This is what one of them said on his way over to the continent earlier.
The law says that we're allowed to fish there, and we will fish there. Up until this year, we've always come to a deal with the French, whereby they give us days at sea to fish elsewhere, because the UK doesn't have enough. They refused to do that this year, so hey, the quid pro quo for that is that we must fish in the areas where the scallops are, and that's where we're fishing.
Now, this is just one case, of course, and people here have really quite high expectations about what Brexit can deliver in terms of a wholesale revisiting of fishing quotas. You can be sure that that will lead to an almighty row, and as we've seen over the past 24 hours, tensions are high enough already.
Thanks, Kieran. Well, let's have a look at precisely what happened. Here's Paul McNamara again.
The flares look like tracer rounds coursing through the night sky, but this is no military action. This is French fishermen firing the first shots of a war on water. Tension has been building for months, and in the early hours of yesterday, words turned to action. French hulls collided with British and rocks thrown onto decks. A modern maritime battle over scallops. Anthony Kisnell is a skipper of one of the 40 or so vessels that surrounded and shunted the handful of British boats.
We're trying to get rid of the English, because if we let them get away with it, they're going to clear out the whole area.
During summer months, the French are banned from fishing scallops in these seas, but that doesn't apply to British vessels. In the past 5 years, an agreement has been made, but in 2018, no deal. Boats returned home to shore, and the morning light revealing the damage. In Brixham today, windows were being repaired.
They were bombarded with stones, flares, bottles of oil, They put ropes across the front of the boat to try and snag the propeller. The Golden Promise went to stand by the Joanna Sea, and they both steamed out together. The French Navy was right alongside, didn't intervene. They called them up, no answer.
Fishing rights in international waters is a historically emotive subject. But why is it scallops that have escalated tensions so high as to almost cause, well, maritime warfare? Well, to put it simply, because they're so important to the livelihoods around here. These French fishermen are allowed to fish all year round. It's only scallops and some other forms of fish that they're not allowed to catch right now. But scallops are their cash crop. For David, it's 80% of his business, which is why he formed part of the French Armada.
We went in peace just to ask them, please leave and come back here after October the 1st. However, it escalated. Of course, I would have done the same for sure. But if they think about it a bit, if we let the stocks replenish, it would be good for them as well.
But if you were one of those British fishermen, would you have come here and done the same?
There wouldn't be any more problems and we would get on well.
According to the British government, the UK fishermen were perfectly within their rights.
My heart goes out to the fishermen who were caught up in the terrible scenes that we saw that happened earlier this week. My sympathies are entirely with them. They were fishing entirely legally. They have every right to be in those waters, and we've talked to the French authorities in order to ensure that we have appropriate policing. These are French waters. It's the responsibility of the French to ensure that those who have a legal right to fish can continue to fish uninterrupted.
I think it's important that we see an amicable solution to what has happened in the Channel. What we've seen between these ships, I think that's what we want. I think it's what France wants, and we'll be working on that.
So both governments want this dispute to end and end fast, but that will require talk around a table and not action on the high seas.
Well, joining me now from Cornwall over the internet is the Conservative MP Cheryl Murray. Do you trust the French to police their own fleet after this behaviour, or do you think the British should do more to protect our fishermen?
I think I heard your question. I have to say that the sound, my end, is not very good. So I think your question was, do you trust the French to police their waters? The French are obliged to police their waters under the Common Fisheries Policy. If they are unable to cope with that, they have every right to invite the Royal Navy to come in and protect our vessels. But the Royal Navy can't go in there unless the French ask them. Now, one of the things that I'm really concerned about is when you have fishermen throwing rocks, throwing pieces of iron, throwing smoke flares on other fishermen from another member state, there is a threat to life. My family know what it's like to lose a fisherman, and I can honestly say that I think it's despicable that French fishermen are behaving in this way. It's a unilateral rule that was imposed by their own government, and the people they should be targeting their displeasure at is the French government, not British fishermen who are trying to go about earning an honest living in a legal way. I
mean, the French, of course, would say that they too are trying to earn honest livings, and the reason they don't fish over the summer is to allow stocks to grow, and that the British are spoiling that by harvesting at this time. But isn't the real problem what happens next year? If we have a hard Brexit, British boats won't be able to fish where they were today, potentially.
If we leave the Common Fisheries Policy, the United Kingdom takes back control of its exclusive economic area. We then police that area with the Royal Navy in the same way as we do under the CFP. But we will be operating under the United Nations rules. The United Nations rules actually state that British fishermen catch whatever they can, and any surplus can be made available for other nations to come in and take. So there should be a greater share to go around the British fishing fleet, which will
So they won't have to go there, you mean? So they wouldn't have to go to those waters off Normandy?
At the moment, if you look at it from a point of view of the seas of my constituency, Cornish vessels get 10% of the haddock stock and 8% of the cod stock in the southwest. The French get about between 60 and 70% of the total allowable catch. That's really unfair. But do you see British vessels going out and throwing missiles at French vessels? No, you don't. And what I'm saying is, this isn't a rule under the Common Fisheries Policy. Those British vessels are there legally. It's a rule that's been imposed by the French authorities, and the French authorities should be the target of the French fishermen.
Cheryl Murray?
Not British fishermen.